أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We continue our discussion on Taqlid. Previously we examined the rational basis for Taqlid. And in Arabic, briefly, scholars have coined this term to summarize the entire discussion. Wujub, ruju' al-jahil ila al-alim. It's a rational law that if you are not an expert in a field, you refer to an expert. Very simple. So we examined the rational basis for it. One other indication that this is rational is that you find rational people historically referring to scholars. Even though they may not have called it taqlid, but in reality, since the days of the Imams, people would do taqlid. Do we have a historical reference from the early scholars that verifies this? Yes. We have, for instance, a Shaykh At-Tusi. He says, وَالَّذِي نَذْهَبُ إِلَيْهِ, our opinion, our view is that أَنَّهُ يَجُوزُ لِلْعَامِّ, a layman can do the following. Who's the layman? الَّذِي لَا يَقْدِرُ عَلَى الْبَحْثِ وَالتَّفْتِيشِ, the one who's not able to go and search for the proper hadiths, to derive rulings, one who's not a scholar. What is he allowed to do? تَقْلِيدُ الْعَالِمِ, he can refer to a scholar. He even uses the word taqlid. Remember, Shaykh Al-Tusi is 1,000 years ago. So taqlid is not this new phenomenon in this age as some are suggesting. Shaykh Al-Tusi recognized this 1,000 years ago. What's your proof? Shaykh Al-Tusi, what's your proof that we can do taqlid? He cites what is called rational practice, سيرة العقلاء. He says, يدل على ذلك أني وجدت عامة الطائفة. I saw the entire Shia school of thought, without an exception. من عهد أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام, since the era of Imam Ali, إلى زماننا هذا, until this era, after the غيبة. يرجعون إلى علمائنا, إلى علمائها. We see that the Shia, they refer to their scholars. ويستفتونهم في الأحكام والعبادات. They take the fatwa of scholars in rulings and in acts of worship. وَيُفْتُونَهُمُ الْعُلَمَاءُ فِيهَا. And the scholars, they issue their fatwa in that field. So, Shaykh Al-Tusi is citing rational practice. I see the tradition historically is for the layman to refer to the scholars. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So this is not a new phenomenon. Notice that Shaykh Al-Tusi says not since the Ghaibah, since which era? Which Imam? Imam Ali alayhi salam. That means Shaykh Al-Tusi here is certifying, he is attesting that even in the presence of Imams, people would still do taqlid of scholars. For those who obviously did not have direct access to the Imams. They were either in other cities or villages, or they didn't always have the pleasure of meeting the Imam alayhi salam. So is taqlid a new phenomenon? Or is this something since the days of Imam Ali by the words of a Shaykh Al-Tusi? Because one big challenge that we have today, there are some who are claiming that back then there was no taqlid. This is something that's recent, maybe 200 years old. And then later on we'll examine the akhbari, usuli, dispute. And a lot of people claim that akhbaris don't believe in taqlid, whereas the usulis invented this taqlid system. We'll examine that later. But this is evidence now that taqlid was there since the day of Imam Ali alayhi salam, where the one who's not an expert refers to the expert and takes fatwas from them. He uses the word taqlid and fatwa. Keep that in mind. So previously we examined rational practice, rational laws that support taqlid, and now we have rational practice. And by the way, because the concept of taqlid is so rational, it's not limited to the Shia school of thought. Sunnis also have taqlid. Yes, their criteria for whom they do taqlid of differs than us. But the idea of taqlid is something all Sunni schools of thought believe in. I'll give you an example, two examples in fact. Today, when you are classifying the Sunni schools of thought, what are the four main ones? Well, Wahhabi is more recent. Hanbali, Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki. What are these names? The leaders of these schools of thought. Abu Hanifa is the leader of the Hanafi school of thought. Shafi'i, Malik ibn Anas, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Every Sunni today who subscribes to this school of thought, to his madhab, is doing taqlid of one of these four. That's the essence of taqlid. Because in reality, where is the Sunni getting his fiqh laws from? Not from the Prophet directly, no. From Abu Hanifa's opinions and fatwas, Shafi'i's opinions and fatwas, Ahmad ibn Hanbal's opinions and fatwas. They're doing taqlid. The only difference between us and them is that they've limited taqlid to four individuals and they pretty much closed the door of ijtihad. Whereas we, the Shia, we say no. Religion needs scholars in every era in order to give us their scholarly jurisprudence. Really, that's the difference. Otherwise, they also do taqlid. They've limited it to four individuals. What? And our question to them, why does Abu Hanifa have the privilege to make his own fiqh school of thought? Why? Did God say that in the Quran? Did the Prophet say that? Only these four have the right to use their ijtihad in these issues? That's our challenge to them. That's our question to them. Yes, brother.
When those four individuals pass away, are they gonna come out with new ones, or just?
Well, historically, they tried to stick to the opinions of these four individuals.
Okay.
Yes, recently we see progress in the Sunni world. And today you have muftis. Have you heard of muftis? Like each kingdom or Arabian country or Islamic country assigns a mufti. Well, what does a mufti do? A mufti does operate within some, within the framework of their school of thought. So they're experts on Abu Hanifa, let's say, if he's a Hanafi mufti. But he does give you his own fatwas. They look at new cases, they look at the texts, they issue fatwas. Just like a marja issues a fatwa, these muftis today, they are issuing fatwas. That's taqlid. That's a type of taqlid. In fact, I would like to share with you the exact quote of Ibn Uthaymeen. Ibn Uthaymeen is a very well-known Sunni scholar. Yes, we consider him to be influenced by Wahhabism and to be an extremist, but he is a Sunni scholar. Listen to his words. In the book Liqa'at al-Bab al-Maftuh, Ibn Uthaymeen says the layman must do taqlid. He even uses the word taqlid. Yes, he puts a restriction. The restriction that he puts is that the scholar that you're following must be in your city. You cannot follow someone who lives in a different place. Why? What's his philosophy? He says, because if you can choose the fatwa of any scholar, then you will start picking and choosing. Oh, there's this mufti in Tunis, his fatwas are really flexible in this area. Let me follow him. And then there's this mufti in Syria, he's also very flexible, and then you start picking and choosing. Ibn Uthaymeen says, that's not right. This is not the proper way of doing taqlid. Stick to a scholar who's in your area and just do taqlid of them. But he uses the word taqlid in this book. That means Sunnis also believe in taqlid. The only difference is the criteria, who's qualified. We say someone must be educated in the school of Ahlul Bayt. You do taqlid of them. They say no. We have other schools of thought. Really, that's the core difference. But the concept of taqlid is so rational, it's so necessary, there is no other alternative that even Sunnis have taqlid. So the one who says that taqlid is a Shia innovation, no, Sunnis have been doing taqlid since the days of Abu Hanifa. And in fact, their taqlid is less flexible than our taqlid. Our taqlid is more progressive, it's more realistic, it addresses our challenges better. So there you go. You have evidence that people who want to practice religion, they have to refer to scholars. And that's really the basic idea with taqlid. Yes, brother.
So generally speaking, Sayyidina, do Sunnis really have a big issue with taqlid, or is it just a new phenomenon now in this day and age where people generally are just questioning taqlid?
It's a modern phenomenon. Historically, Sunnis did not have a problem with taqlid. It's a more of a modern phenomenon where you see media being used to slander the Shia, to disqualify the Marji'iyya system, the Hawza institutions. So they're accusing the Shia of, you have this innovation where you blindly follow your scholars. Well, you Sunnis have been doing that for over 1,000 years now. What's the difference? Really, what's the difference? Just like you blindly follow Abu Hanifa without really challenging him as a layman, I follow someone in my era who's an expert. What's the difference? Yes, Abu Hanifa is closer historically to the era of the Prophet ﷺ, but he uses his opinion. That's the core idea here. So, historically it was not really an issue. It's more of a modern phenomenon to disqualify the Marji'iyya system.
So, I mean, along those lines, in today's world, so maybe 100 years ago, information was not readily available to justify taqlid. But today there is so much information to back that thought process. How is it that it's becoming more of an issue today, whereas information is readily available to justify taqlid, yet many are questioning it?
I think there are some natural factors. One of them is the failure of a lot of Sunni institutions when it comes to religious authority. They don't have central authority, organized system. That's why you have groups like Daesh and ISIS, and they claim legitimacy, right? Whereas when they see the Shia system and how the Shias are committed to their Marji'iyya system and scholars, and how that's a source of strength, even in times of chaos and turmoil like Iraq, the Marji'iyya was a source of strength and unification for the Shia. They despise that. So how do they weaken the Shia? Let's start a media campaign against their Marji'iyya system. If you weaken the belief of the Shia and their scholars, they as a community become weaker. That's one natural factor that's causing them to question this and to highlight it in the media.
I mean, the way you just mentioned it just sounds out of mere jealousy, perhaps, that they envy.
Part of it is envy and jealousy, but part of it is they realize this is a source of strength for us. It's an area of strength. And because they consider us their enemies or heretics, if they see us having an area of strength, obviously they would like to weaken us. So even if there is no jealousy involved, the fact that they see us as heretics, they see the Marji'iyya as a very strong point that we have in our school of thought. So they would like to weaken that, because they know that that will weaken the Shia altogether. So that's natural. It's expected for them to do that in this time and era.
Well, how about some modern day speakers within the Shia school of thought that could be essentially muddying the waters with that thought process? How would you explain their thoughts?
There are some speakers who highlight these controversies, obviously, and they might push for some agenda against the whole system of taqlid. Without passing a judgment on them, some of them do so for personal interests, because they might not have received the spotlight from the seminaries, so they're finding an alternative way. That happens with a number of them. You know, some people want recognition. So if the marja or the Hawza institution does not give them that recognition that they're craving for, they will take an alternative route to get attention. A lot of times it really boils down to that. It's sad, but it does boil down to that. So this is a challenge. This is a challenge that we do have. Some of them, if we want to give them the benefit of the doubt, they might not be aware of how the Marji'iyya is a source of strength. They don't have much experience in reading Shia history, in the role of Shia scholars, in really saving the Shia community. Some of them are not aware of that. When you talk to them, you know, they're shocked. Have you read the history of Shia scholars? The Marjas, the Tobacco Revolution, the 1920 Iraqi Revolution, that revolution, the Mashruta, this. Are you aware of that? They're not aware of that. They heard one or two stories of someone connected to the marja who misused khums, and that's it. They want to disqualify the whole system. They take a small little incident, they make big generalizations out of ignorance. If I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, it's out of ignorance.
Is it just ignorance, or would you say arrogance and just crazy?
Well, arrogance goes back to the first point that I mentioned. Some of them it's out of arrogance and wanting attention. So that's how they disqualify the system, to get attention. Then there's a second category, it may be arrogance, yes. If I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, it's ignorance. So it's either arrogance or ignorance. Yes.
Okay, so we follow our scholars get their knowledge and information from Ahlul Bayt, but where do they claim they get their information? Their scholars get their information from, and their.
Well, they get it from their own system of hadith, from Bukhari, from the canonical texts, from their own jurisprudence. Each Sunni school of thought has its particular system. So they see companions, for instance, as having the authority after the Prophet. So if there's a hadith from a companion on a religious matter, they accept it. They accept whatever Bukhari chose as a hadith. A lot of them will accept it. Just because it's in Bukhari, let's consider it sahih. Or they just accept what Abu Hanifa said, what Shafi'i said in a legal matter. They see them as the sources of authority, not the Ahlul Bayt. That's why Bukhari, who was a contemporary of Imam al-Jawad, for instance, he doesn't narrate a single hadith from Imam al-Jawad. And that's why you see Sunnis historically have not recognized the religious authority of these later Imams.
But what he said, what if those four die? What happens?
They continue their path. They just continue. They try to figure out what was Abu Hanifa's system to apply it to modern cases. So they're still following him. Like his book of rulings, they still follow it.
I mean, we do that to a certain extent too, because it's not mandatory for somebody where they're doing a taqlid of a scholar, modern day scholar who passes away. They're not obligated to switch at that point.
Well, most Shia ulama, they say if you followed someone in your lifetime, you can stay following them. But not to start following someone who passed away, right? So it's quite different. In the end, we do have that condition that you must follow a living scholar to begin with. You can stay on that scholar, sure, but you must have followed him in your lifetime. Whereas they say, no, we could follow someone who lived 1,000 years ago.
Not to beat a dead horse, but there are the two famous books where these types of debates have taken place, such as Peshawar Nights and Munajat. And in these books, there are very specific references to the books of the Sunni schools of thought, such as Bukhari and whatnot. There are some out there who are now have started this wave that these two books are pretty much made up. Somebody just decided to write them up. These events did not occur. But how can they deny the evidence that's provided in these books in terms of the various matters are concerned?
The fabrications that have been made?
Right.
Well, in reality, if you disqualify these books, there is no foundation for those schools of thought. And when you're put in that spot, there's historical pressure on you, there's global pressure on you. What alternative do they have? If I come out and admit, like some scholars are, by the way, especially in Egypt, a number of Egyptian professors and doctors and experts in Islamic law from Al-Azhar are coming and doubting Bukhari. They're taking a lot of heat for it, but they have the courage to do so. If I disqualify the system, what other alternative do I have? Nothing. So they're stuck in this situation. Because they're not going to admit that the Ahlul Bayt and that whole history is the alternative, obviously, for political reasons and historical reasons. So even though some of them know, I've heard some of them privately telling some of their friends, we don't have an alternative. What do I do? What's my alternative?
Can they consider that a sense of awakening where they can see it now? Because there is no alternative. I mean, there has to be an answer to everything. The fact that there's not an alternative, is it easier to just stick to the path of wrong?
It's convenient.
It's convenient.
Yes, it's convenient. Because if you want to go against the system, you lose credibility, you lose your status, you lose your followers, you lose your paycheck. Some of them clearly had stated to a Shia scholar whom he befriended, he told him, I know everything you have is the haqq, but I am here, a local imam of a mosque in one of the Middle Eastern countries. I have a community that respects me. I have a paycheck. I have a family to support. If I come and admit, what's my alternative? Go and become a janitor? Who's gonna take care of me anymore? So I'm not willing to have that severe change in my lifestyle. So it's not easy. It requires a huge sacrifice. Not everyone's willing to make that sacrifice. Boils down to that. Now let's talk about evidence in Qur'an about taqlid. Before we get to the hadith. Is there any verse in the Holy Qur'an that supports the concept of taqlid? One verse that scholars discuss is verse 122 of Surah At-Tawbah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً فَلَوْلَا نَفَرَ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ مِّنْهُمْ طَائِفَةٌ لِيَتَفَقَّهُوا فِي الدِّينِ وَلِيُنذِرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ إِذَا رَجَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَحْذَرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding in Surah At-Tawbah, this was revealed in Medina when now you had a Muslim society. Allah is commanding Muslims from neighboring areas, tribes, villages, because now the Muslim lands were expanding. More and more people and tribes were following Islam. The Quran says it's not possible for all the believers to travel and go and learn. Therefore, what is it that's practical? What's practical, because remember back then there was no satellite TV, internet, even books were not accessible. So if you had 1,000 people living in a village, how do they know about their legal laws, about Islam? The Quran says, well, it's not possible for all of them to migrate to Medina and come and learn. It's not possible. So what's possible? The Quran says, let there be a group from each village, from each tribe that travels. They go, they study Islamic law, religion, يَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. They get a proper understanding of religion. Then, وَلِيُنذِرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ إِذَا رَجَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ. Then when they go back to their tribe, they teach their tribe. They warn their tribe about these laws. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَحْذَرُونَ. So that hopefully their tribe will accept and exercise caution in accepting these beliefs. How does this verse prove the concept of taqlid? Think about it before I examine the scholarly perspective on it. The verse basically says, let there be a group who travels, they go, let's say, to Medina, they learn, they come back and educate their people. How does this prove taqlid? Yes?
When they're traveling, they're learning about the religion, they're coming back, having the responsibility, basically like a marja, and then they're going to be in the spot, or the people are going to do taqlid to them, depending on them and being trusting them in terms of learning the religion the correct way.
Exactly, that's a very good argument. When the Quran is commanding this group to learn and then teach their people, is the Quran also commanding the people to accept their teachings or no? Because if you say no, what's the result of saying no? Let's say someone says the Quran is saying go learn and then teach your people, but there's no indication in the verse that you have to accept what these scholars are telling you. Someone could make that argument. How would you disqualify that argument?
That's the only information they have to.
Well, what's the point then? If the Quran is saying to these group of people, go and become scholars and then come back to your village and then teach the people, but the people don't have to accept your teachings, then what's the point? It's a given in the verse that when Allah is commanding this group of scholars to come back to their villages and teach their people, that their people accept their religious teachings. Otherwise it's in vain. What's the point of them going? So this verse is a verse that is commanding the people to follow who? This group of scholars. That's taqlid at a very basic level. Because these people in that village, they're not meaning the Prophet or the representatives of the prophets, like for example Imam Ali being in his place or someone else that the Prophet appoints. They're not seeing him. They're not hearing his words. Who are they relying on to convey to them what the Prophet is saying? Who are they relying on? This group of scholars. That's taqlid, where you rely on experts who know the law to tell you what they think the Prophet said. So there is basis for taqlid in the Holy Quran.
I mean, when you look
Not using the word taqlid, obviously. You don't need that word taqlid. Just like people say, I want the word hijab in Quran to believe in hijab. The concept of hijab is clearly mentioned. The boundaries of hijab are mentioned. Now, the spirit of taqlid is found in this verse. Yes, brother.
I mean, when you look at, as far as all of humanity, whether we're talking about Sunnis, Shias, and all together from that standpoint, as far as the concept of taqlid goes, is it more of an issue for them to have an issue with that, or the fact that when they hear something that is right and it doesn't, and they just don't want to do it out of convenience, then they're nitpicky about such issues as taqlid, regardless of what it is? So is it more of a conscience issue of, I know it's right, but it's inconvenient for me. I like just following the easy way. Even the vast majority of Sunnis, they're not exactly following every single path.
No, they're not. Absolutely.
So whether they try to pose, and those same ones that do not follow, do challenge the Shia side of school. Well, somebody could tell them, are you following the teachings, every teaching of Abu Hanifa out there? Are you even aware of it? So, and even in our side, as far as the Shia school of thought goes, the modern day speakers who are raising issues, it's a matter of convenience when I look at it. It's not so much as, okay, the fatwas that they're providing, is it really beneficial to my life if I truly look at it from that perspective or not? I mean, it's just, it's a conscious decision that you can make, analyze it for a few minutes, and then determine whether it's the right thing to do or not. So I don't know, it's more convenient.
Brother, the nature of human beings is to find the convenient route.
Right.
Because sometimes the other route binds you. You have to act responsibly. You have to commit to a system. You have to impose restrictions on yourselves. People don't like restrictions. So if I do away with this whole system of taqlid, I am free to come up with my own laws. This is halal for me, this is haram. It's easy, it's convenient. And people like convenience. Who doesn't? But that's the test of this life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us in this life to try us. Not to take a convenient path, but to take that path which Allah wants for us, which is usually a difficult path. It's not convenient. At the time of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, it was very convenient to stay back in Kufa and not go and defend your Imam. Very convenient. And you could come up with 1,000 excuses. But what did Allah want from the people? And Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam has a beautiful hadith. Maybe we discussed it in Al-Kafi, or we will one day. The Imam alayhi salam says, if you have two options ahead of you, you don't know, is this is right or that's wrong. The one that you find your nafs feels convenient with, know that this is the wrong one. Avoid it. That's a built-in indicator Allah has given you. It's really a matter of convenience for a lot of people. And some people, honestly, it's just ignorance. Some people don't know. Once they're educated, they see the philosophy, the reasoning there, the logic there, they do accept. Those who are not stubborn, when they see that, they do accept. It's important to seek that education. So verse 122 of Surah At-Tawbah is very clear that a group of people, they go, they learn, they're educated in Medina, the center of learning, and then they take that understanding of Islam that they have, they go back to the people, and what do? They teach them Islamic law. And the Quran, by commanding them, is also commanding the people to accept, لَعَلَّهُمْ يَحْذَرُونَ, so that hopefully those people will take these laws and implement them. This is the concept of taqlid in Surah At-Tawbah, verse 122. So we have a Quranic basis, the one who says this is invented, it's made up. We mentioned, number one, we have intellectual, logical proofs. We have rational practice. Other schools of thought also have it. And this is a clear verse in the Holy Quran. Now let's transition to Hadith.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Isn't it also common, don't want to say common sense, but you have to do taqlid to understand religion or to give you guidance. Like for example, if you take for school or any other parts of like attorneys or education system, you have to get the education somewhere, or else you're not going to get the boundaries of what you can do. You can like doctors and so forth. And when it comes to religion, you need those scholars to teach you these boundaries, or else everybody can do their own taqlid for their own for their own convenience, right? Can we argue that? Just like
Not really, because my counter argument to you would be, let's just consider atheists. I'm going to a university, I'm sitting down with these teachers, I'm picking their knowledge and I'm learning. I'm learning from the text that they're teaching. I don't have to follow the teachers from that standpoint. When I become a doctor, I could be innovative and come up with new things out there. So am I really following teachers,
But there's still,
specifically a professor?
you don't have to follow 100%, but there's still boundaries that they set that you were taught in school as a doctor. There are certain things that you have to abide by. You know, you can't. You probably can't come up with a different avenue for like a disease. Okay, but you need the tools to become a doctor. Without those tools, you can't be a doctor, or engineer, or an accountant, or an attorney, or whatever. You still need some type of tools for you to become educated at that specific area. Without that tools, you can't be where you're at.
I guess it's a lower form of taqlid in a way.
No, am I wrong?
It is a specific type of taqlid, sure.
Yeah.
We can call it a specific type of taqlid. One other thought about this verse in the Holy Quran. There are some who have translated it in a different way, just to give you that other perspective as well. It does not change the fact that the verse is still talking about the spirit of taqlid. The other tafsir, the other way of understanding the verse is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about war and battlefield and believers going and fighting in the battlefield. So this verse that I read is saying the following according to the second tafsir. It's saying that while all believers cannot go and fight, not everybody can leave their city and go and fight. Therefore, let a group of believers stay in the city, learn about their Islamic laws and rulings, and then when those fighters come back, they fill them in on what they missed out on. That's another way of, maybe some Sunni schools of thought, that's how they understand the tafsir of this verse. So they flip the meaning around based on what they understand from the linguistic meaning of the verse. But it doesn't change the idea that the spirit of taqlid is contained in that, because when those people who, let's say, were gone for months in the battlefield, when they come back, they are referring to these scholars or these mu'mineen who understand religion to tell them about Islamic laws. In other words, the Quran is still legitimizing the idea of referring to those who have fiqh, a faqih, one who understands religion. So it doesn't really change even if we take that tafsir, but our scholars have taken the first tafsir. It's more clear from the tone of the verse. Let's now transition into hadith. But very briefly, one point about taqlid before we examine a few hadiths. Historically, in the beginning of Islam, the word taqlid was used negatively. In fact, there are some hadiths that condemn taqlid. Why? What is the meaning of those hadiths? Very briefly, taqlid at the time meant following someone blindly, without evidence. What the pagans would do, just finding their forefathers on a path of worshipping idols, let's do the same. The Quran condemns this idea of taqlid. The Imams of Ahlul Bayt, the Prophet ﷺ, they all condemn this. So if you find a hadith, because today some people are acting smart, he'll pull out one hadith, which we can even discuss the chain of it. Sometimes it's not even a solid chain. See, the Imam himself is condemning taqlid. Well, what type of taqlid is the Imam condemning? So when you look at the context of those words, ijtihad and taqlid had a negative connotation. Ijtihad meant at the time of Al-Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam, the word ijtihad, jurisprudence, which we translate it today, meant that you use your own opinion when you are dealing with a text. You use your own opinion and insert it when you're dealing with a text like Quran or Hadith. And this is something that Abu Hanifa did. He did not work within the text to understand it. He would actually come up with his own opinions and insert them into religion. That is the ijtihad that the Imams condemned. But a scholar who's true to the text does not do that. The scholar says, I examine the text, I'm trying to understand the text. I'm not coming up with something and adding it to the text. Abu Hanifa would do that. That's the condemned ijtihad. And the condemned taqlid is to follow people like that, because they have no authority to be followed when they're inserting their own opinions. So just keep that in mind. If you ever come across a hadith that's condemning taqlid, that's the type of taqlid it's condemning. Let's examine the first hadith here. In one sahih hadith, Al-Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam tells his companion, Aban ibn Taghlib. He was one of the good companions of Al-Imam As-Sadiq. The Imam tells him, An-Najashi mentions this hadith in his book Al-Rijal, page 10. اجلس في مسجد المدينة. Sit in the mosque of Medina. وأفتي الناس. Give fatwa to the people. فإني أحب أن أرى في شيعتي مثلك. I love to see amongst my Shia people like you. Look at this hadith. Al-Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam is telling Aban, who was a scholar, he was an expert trained by the Imam. The Imam tells him, sit in the masjid and issue fatwas to the people. I love to see qualified scholars like you from our Shias doing that. So the Imam is commanding his companion to issue fatwas. Now, when the Imam is commanding Aban ibn Taghlib to issue fatwas, isn't there an assumed command from the Imam that if you hear the fatwas of Aban, take them? Or no, there is no such assumed command? What do you say? Of course there is. So if someone heard the Imam say this, and then he came one day to the masjid and saw Aban teaching and issuing fatwas, that layperson, should they take the words of Aban or no? Of course they have to, because they heard their Imam commanding Aban to issue fatwas. That means the Imam alayhi salam is also commanding the people to accept his fatwas. That means the Imam is commanding people to do taqlid of Aban. That's evidence for taqlid. Because Aban is an expert, he's issuing fatwas in the masjid. The Imam alayhi salam is also indirectly telling his Shia, accept the words of Aban, do taqlid of him. He's qualified, he's trained. What are some counter arguments? Let me hear if you have any counter arguments.
Question first.
Yes.
What was the guy's name?
Aban,
Aban.
in Arabic, alif, ba, alif, noon. Aban, A-B-A-N, ibn Taghlib. Taghlib. Ta, ghain, lam, ba. He was a scholar. He was trained by the Imams, peace be upon them. He knew how the fiqh works. So the Imam commands him, sit in the masjid, aftin nas. The Imam uses the word fatwa. You want clearer than that? Fatwa. The Imam uses the word fatwa in the Sahih Hadith. Give fatwa to the people. Then, if you think, oh, this was a special relationship between Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam and Aban, because Aban had this divine position. No, the end of the Hadith solves this for us. The Imam says, I love to see amongst my Shia people like you. That means qualified people who are honest, trustworthy scholars to go and give fatwas to the people. That means the Imam is encouraging people to become scholars and issue fatwas the right way. So we know it's not a special thing between the Imam and Aban. Because someone could argue the Imam is not legitimizing the entire system of taqlid. The Imam is saying only Aban you can do taqlid of him, but not others. The ending of the hadith shows otherwise, that the Imam is encouraging us to follow anyone like Aban. Any scholar like Aban who's qualified and he's giving fatwas, follow him. Yes, brother.
So were there
there scholars that were to give fatwa other than the imams of that time?
Aban.
I mean,
That's the clearest example. Muhammad ibn Muslim, he would give fatwas. Zurara, he would give fatwas. Aban ibn Taqlid, Zakaria ibn Adam, they would all issue fatwas, authorized by the imams themselves. We'll get to that. That's another part of our evidence for taqlid.
But
Yes, brother.
The fatwas that they issued during the times of the imams, were they like contradicting each other? But like we have today, like one marja says one thing, the other one says something else.
We can assume that they did not agree in 100% of the fatwas. Yes, there were less disagreements because they're closer to the source.
Yeah.
But I can tell you from the hadiths that we have, sometimes Zurara or Muhammad ibn Muslim or some other companions, they would disagree on some details. They would disagree on some details. Yet the Imam authorized that whole system. They would disagree. Sometimes, in fact, they would come in the presence of the Imam, they would quarrel. Muhammad ibn Muslim has deduced this, fatwa. It should be this way. The Imam had to calm them down. Yeah, it was common for them to have some minor differences. Yes, today the differences are greater because we're further away from the source. That's natural. It's just a natural historical consequence. Obviously, when you can see the Imam alayhi salam, you will have less differences, but they were still there. Not all the companions of the Imams were in complete agreement. In fact, if you remember from legal theory or some other classes, sometimes the Imam would deliberately cause differences amongst his companions. He would teach one companion a fatwa, he would teach another companion a contradicting fatwa to save the Shia for taqiyya purposes. We examined that in detail in legal theory, why the Imam would do that. Because if the Shia were known to have one unified opinion, the governments would go after them. It would be clearly a Shia opinion. They would get persecuted for that. Sometimes the Imam says, أَنَا خَالَفْتُ بَيْنَهُمْ, I caused, disunity among them. Imam al-Sadiq says that for a higher purpose, for another cause, to save the Shia historically. In any case, that's a different issue. Let's not get there now. This is something we discussed in legal theory in detail. But we have companions of the Imams, peace be upon them, commanded by the Imams, peace be upon them, to issue fatwas. That means the Imam is also commanding the Shia community to accept those fatwas once they hear those fatwas. You don't have access to the Imam? Go to Aban ibn Taqlid. He will give you the fatwa. Now the second part of this argument, you could argue, well, Aban was not doing any ijtihad. He was just a tape recorder. He hears the fatwa from Imam al-Sadiq. He sits in the masjid and tells you exactly what Imam al-Sadiq did. Not more, not less. That's not what the marja' doing. The marja' uses his intellectual capacity. He puts proofs next to each other. He examines, he studies for 20 years, then he issues a fatwa. Someone can make that argument, right? This hadith by Imam Rida alayhi salam answers this objection. Ibn Idris, in his book Mustatrafat al-Sara'ir, he narrates a hadith from the book of Hisham ibn Salim, an Abi Abdullah al-Sadiq alayhi salam. And also this hadith is from Imam Rida alayhi salam. إنما علينا أن نلقي إليكم الأصول وعليكم أن تفرعوا. The Imam alayhi salam says, we the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, we give you the guiding principles, the general laws, and you, my qualified companions, take them and branch out. Apply them to specific cases. So now we know the Imams didn't just ask their companions to just convey the ruling verbatim from the Imam. The Imam is actually authorizing them to use their understanding of religion to apply cases, to apply principles to particular cases. We give you the usul, the general principles. But what about the details? Like istishab is a principle, the law of continuity. That you have to get from the Imam. You can't make it up by yourself. But how does the law of continuity apply to, in which case a scholar will spend 10 years figuring that out. The Imam says, that's up to you. You figure that out. See, the Imam is authorizing taqlid. So this will negate the possibility that the Imam is telling Aban, just sit and convey my words exactly. Don't use any type of reasoning yourself. That is not the case. We have to break for salah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. Did you